Torn from the Headlines, brought to you by the Crawlspace Network. This is a podcast where we shine the spotlight on the latest and greatest and scariest breaking news in the world of mystery, murder, mayhem, and the missing. While we examine cases that are just coming into focus within the last week or so, they may very well be some that you haven't heard of or that we think deserve more publicity, or they may or there may be news concerning famous old and cold cases. Torn from the Headlines is originate I'm sorry. Torn from the Headlines is originated by David D. Perlmutter.
All right, welcome tonight. I am Tim Pilleri from Crawlspace, here today with Chloe Canter, who you just heard from, and Professor David D. Perlmutter. How's everyone doing tonight? Good. And we are live on YouTube, and this is something we're going to be doing more often. And we've already got a comment. Hello there, Osclo Dave. Doing good over here. So tonight on Torn from the Headlines, we are talking about the story that has really gripped the country. It is the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, really the assassination of him on the street in New York City by a man, well, potentially by a man who was just arrested today. His name is Luigi Mangione, and he's a 26-year-old Penn grad. And it is a developing story. I've been on his social media for a good amount of the afternoon. He has a Twitter that was up. He had a YouTube that was recently taken down, which was a weird one. Because he had uploaded a video. He had timed and uploaded a video release, and then apparently he had another one that was set to go up on December 11th, but they removed his channel. So this is a guy who was arrested this morning around 9:15 a.m. in Altoona, Pennsylvania. He was on a bus going west from New York, and he's already appeared in court this evening. And this is a really wild story, partially because of the reaction from people online, really touting this guy as a bit of a hero, and almost immediately. And it's murder, so that's not where my head goes, but I can understand, and I think a lot of us Americans can relate to picturing the healthcare industry as the bad guy, especially a CEO. But all right, so who wants to start here tonight?
I'll jump in and just say I think we look at a victim's circumstances, and we as a society and consumers of true crime, we can be pretty critical of victims if they're not the quote unquote perfect victim. And in some circles, Brian Thompson is like a perfect kind of guy. Um so successful, he has a family, but a lot of people don't view the super wealthy as sympathetic people. Um the rest of us peons, let's face it, are a little bit jealous of that much success. And people in the lower socioeconomic class, pretty much everybody has a story of being screwed over by a health insurance company. While Brian Thompson doesn't represent everything that's wrong with the healthcare industry, I think people can relate to the frustrations that might send someone to that point. And they're almost treating him like he's like a Robin Hood, but that's not really what's happening here.
Yeah, I found two things of interest here. First, this is yet another case about how a crime occurs, or in some the previous instances, an allegation of a crime, a mystery, a missing occurs, and the time it takes for it to become a national obsession has shortened to hours. You said you found his social media. Of course, I guess to be a murderer nowadays, you have to have your own social media presence, before you commit the murder. That it's part of your planning. But also, you go on Reddit. There's already Reddit websites. Reddit Brian Thompson, Reddit CEO murder. There's already with tens of thousands of followers, all commenting in real time. Hundreds of thousands of comments are flooding, and everybody has got an opinion. And you think like, gosh, the case. It's not even the question of what the case isn't cold yet. Is like there's not even a case yet, but it's all part of the national consciousness, torn from the headlines.
Do you remember when the Boston Marathon bombings happened in the aftermath, how Rolling Stone put the younger bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev on the cover, and he kind of looked like a rock star, and the story painted him in a very sympathetic light, which offended a lot of the victims and just like citizens unrelated to the bombings were just offended by this very sympathetic characterization. And if you watch dramatizations of the event, he's very much portrayed as someone who was under the influence of their older brother. And people would debate about this, especially when it was hot in the headlines. And I made the comment of, would we even be talking about this if this guy wasn't handsome, if he wasn't hot, if he wasn't good looking? Would we even be talking about this? And everyone in the room kind of went quiet because we realized that's why we were talking about it at all. If he was this unattractive guy, would his story have as much intrigue? And that was an element to this story here. The guy lowers his mask in one of the surveillance images, and people are romanticizing the way that he looks, commenting on his appearance, saying that he's handsome, saying that he's tall, and talking about his smile and his eyebrows and his eyes. On TikTok, he's almost like I said, like a like an icon.
Yeah, he was also flirting at that hostel in New York, so I think that sort of maybe let people know he was available or something. But I mean, you really didn't see much of him until today. So I mean, he did seem to have a nice smile, but then today, you see a lot of pictures and everything. And what occurred to me pretty quickly in looking at his Twitter, and by the way, these were all tweets and postings from before this period of time. So I think the last thing that he had tweeted was something over the summer. So nothing directly related that I could find. There are certainly some interesting posts that he made and retweets and things like that, but nothing direct. Yeah, and on his Twitter header, one of the pictures was of an X-ray, presumably of his back, I guess, with some back surgery, and that it appears to be the reporting that he had some back surgery that he was upset at the healthcare industry about.
A lot of people theorized right off the bat that this was someone who had some sort of a grievance with the health insurance industry. And of course, the scrawlings on the shell casings of deny, defend, and depose, I believe was what he had written. That
Which is already a T-shirt. I mean, you can buy. It's already been merchandised. That's what I find just amazing. The speed of this. People have already like gone and set up T-shirt sales, coffee mug sales. People are actually going to be making a profit within 24 hours.
it's the same thing with the Trump assassination attempt. We talked about that. People were already getting that image tattooed on their skin. There's fan accounts on TikTok for this guy before he was even identified by law enforcement. I saw this girl, and I know it was probably mostly satirical, but I opened the app, and before it was the first thing that came up, it said, this girl is saying, do you guys think that he's thinking about us the way that we're thinking about him? And there was nothing, there was no caption, there was no text on the screen that was indicating who she was talking about, but I immediately knew who she was talking about because of how hot this story is. That's how pervasive it is. You don't even need to specifically say who you're talking about. We just know.
One thing I'd like to bring in, Chloe, you just mentioned about, you didn't use this word exactly, but I think it's what I would mimic what you're saying about the romance of the deed. And there's, for my generation, one of the great books was Barbara Tuchman, who was a great historian. She wrote The Guns of August, but her second book after that was called The Proud Tower, about Europe before World War I. And there was this period, this was a period of great wealth, industrialization, big changes in society, and huge separations of extreme poverty and extreme power and gold and luxury. And there was a series of political movements, including communism and anarchism. And the anarchists, especially, there was a section within them that believed in assassination of the wealthy and the powerful. And there was a whole series of famous assassinations of kings, wealthy people, prime ministers, and it was called The Deed. And there's a chapter in Barbara Tuchman's book, The Proud Tower, about how many artists and others, while they didn't quite come out and say, yeah, I approve of murder, they liked the idea of the romance of somebody attacking the super wealthy, and that was sort of innate in society at that time. And maybe we're in that kind of a time again, because absolutely there's 50 million people on social media saying very positive things about somebody who may or may not, but will be soon alleged to have committed a murder.
I think it's the fact that he went after someone who was super rich and someone who could certainly be portrayed by society as sort of a villain based on how corrupt our healthcare industry is, and just what's been reported is UnitedHealthcare apparently denies twice as many claims as other insurance companies. But he also was able to evade the police for about a week after shooting someone in broad daylight in the middle of New York City, getting away on a bicycle. And the police, they've since been redeemed, but they were flailing and it was pretty embarrassing for them. And I think that also made him a bit attractive to the general public, that he almost outsmarted the police. Like, that I think added to his whole intrigue. He left Monopoly money in his backpack that he, I think, intentionally left for law enforcement to find. Like, people find him clever and calculated and a step ahead of the police, which I guess, like I said, heightens his intrigue.
Yeah, going back to the Trump attempted assassination, which of course did kill someone, that was another one of these cases, and we've talked about this before, where the assassin seems to be, you can't even believe, they're the complete opposite of the Day of the Jackal professional assassin. They almost seemed like some, bumbler who just like had an incredible streak of luck to get in a position where they could do harm. But I think part of the romance that's going on right now is that there's all these elements in that here that look like really smart planning. And I went through social media just to like check off boxes, the use of a suppressor, which that's, I saw when it first happened, I saw like 50,000 posts saying, my friend who's a gun person says it must have been a professional hit because, that's the only people who use suppressors. That's not true. Like, it's possible to make one yourself. We don't know the circumstances, but the backpack, as something to misdirect, the calm demeanor, the knowledge of I have a whole list here and I'm not going to read all of them, but like, it's almost like this is the opposite of the typical Oswald or the Trump guy bumbler. And that's part of the mystique that I guess he created for a week.
Yeah, the calm demeanor was a little frightening, I have to say. The way he just got back on the bike and rode away so casually. But I did want to mention, and I'm actually going to jump off in just a couple minutes here. But I did want to mention that um, it's come up that this guy, was a Penn grad, and we talked about his social media. He's a smart guy. You can tell that pretty instantly from his social media. I have to admit, I don't even really know what he's talking about a lot of the time. What he's saying, I don't know if that's because it's over my head or if he's not making sense. I honestly don't know. But I did want to say that he had written a lot of reviews on Goodreads, and one of the reviews he actually reviewed Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber's manifesto called "Industrial Society and Its Future." And to your point a couple minutes ago, David, at the end of Luigi's review, he quotes, "Violence never solved anything," and end quote. And he said, "is a statement uttered by cowards and predators." He says, "These companies don't care about you or your kids or your grandkids. They have zero qualms about burning down the planet for a buck. So why should we have any qualms about burning them down to survive?" It's interesting, just a little bit of insight into what he was thinking about there. Sort of supportive of Ted Kaczynski.
It's very dehumanizing of Brian Thompson. This whole thing, he's been so dehumanized. He's been conflated with an entire industry that one person couldn't possibly be wholly responsible for. It's obviously a case of vigilantism who against someone who, as far as we know, hasn't committed any like actual crimes. Of course, we all have criticisms about the industry he represented, but it really is alarming. Like, does this individual think that he will make a change in the healthcare industry besides healthcare executives taking their names down from websites? Like, what change is he going to enact beyond this?
It's a great question. Yeah, you mentioned people taking bios and photos down from their sites, other healthcare professionals doing that, and that's fear, right? That's a reaction from being afraid of not only what Mangione allegedly did, but the reaction online, how there was really no empathy for Brian Thompson, and the comments, could be taken as vaguely threatening if you're a CEO of a healthcare company. But I don't know. Like, at what point does fear lead to change? Not the way you want to accomplish that, of course, but I don't know. I mean, I think people feel helpless and they are sick over profits over people, and I think this is an enormous, wide reaction to that.
Yeah, I think this is something where we can look at a social phenomenon at the same time as like a murder case. And in the second instance of a murder case, you have something that has all these levels of complexity, and you wonder about, like, for example, one thing I've noticed is that there's no conspiracy theory about a wider conspiracy, which is almost always the case with the Oswald type Patsy murderer. That maybe because he went to University of Pennsylvania, and he's an engineer, he's a very smart guy, as you were saying. There's an instant assumption that he was a lone wolf gunman, which is unprecedented, because almost always we hear that, like, well, there were 12 people who opened fire or something like that. And I have not heard. This is why anarchism is an interesting prism to look at that, because of course anarchism, you're not supposed to be part of an organization. The Anarchist League doesn't exist. I mean, they do, but like you're not supposed to be part of an organized group if you're an anarchist. So he has that level of romance of just being somebody who may have just decided to do this on their own for their own reasons, but is not part of some like big government, organizational conspiracy, which gives him more romance in the storytelling.
Okay, I'm gonna head out of this conversation right now, but I will be watching and keep the conversation going. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Tim. All right. So I'm reading some live updates on Luigi Mangione, who I can't believe is only 26 years old. And it seems like he has stopped cooperating. I guess he was approached by law enforcement in that McDonald's. They asked him if he had been to New York recently, and he started to shake. I think initially he was responding to questions, but now he is not.
Do you think that he is going to retain this romantic mystique as we learn more details, or as the story plays out? You gave the example of the Boston bombers. They killed people, ordinary people. I mean, obviously, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare was a person and with a family, as you said, but that act seemed truly anarchistic, just hurting people who happened to be standing at a corner or running in a race. And I didn't get a sense that the appreciation or whatever it was, although the Menendez brothers just had their moment again, right? And I'm old enough to remember when I before social media, I saw it was true. It was in the courtroom. They did stories on how many people were in love with them. I guess because they were handsome. That overrides everything in our society, right? Lookism.
Unfortunately, it's true. I really do think that innately we still are very primitive, and we are looking at traits that are in someone's own perception or just instinctually evolutionarily adaptive, and that would include symmetrical facial features, being of good physical health and fitness, but also if we're looking back into our like caveman, cave woman brain, and you would think that we at this point would have evolved beyond this, but I do think that there are women who consider men who kill to be attractive because they were the leader of the pack and they were strong enough to be able to kill someone, and back in the caveman days that was necessary to protect a family. So they see this person who, like you said, went off on their own and took a stand and did something, but they're also strong and powerful in these people's eyes. And I don't think that inmates in jail, regardless of whatever atrocity they might have committed, I don't think that these are always chronically lonely people. I think they often do have female companionship in the form of pen pals and visitors, especially if they're good looking. I think that really does play a huge role.
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember for almost any murderer, no matter who they killed or what they did, if they fell into a certain range of attractiveness, they seemed to have an entourage or a cohort that wrote them letters. I mean, that's been studied by your fellow psychologists as an actual phenomenon. We'll see with him. Do you think that some of these circumstances, which are really interesting and different, that came up? I mean, I think when this first happened, I turned to my wife and said, "This is Yellowstone level, with all the elaborate details, and that somebody paying for a hit or something." I don't think there was any belief in the first couple of days that this was just some guy, that this must be some super secret organization that meets somewhere under a volcano, with number two and chairs that disappear if you don't accomplish your task. But if it turns out that this is a guy who just decided to do this and somehow did the research and created all of these elements that are cinematic in every way. I mean, I can't believe that the movie isn't being cast already. I guess I don't know if they do docudramas as quickly as they used to when I was watching about murders, but I have to think somebody's going to be doing something. Do you think that this will continue? This is going to have an afterlife, or are we going to forget about this a couple of weeks from now?
I honestly think it depends on what information comes out about Luigi Mangione. I think the public still needs to get to know him a little bit better. I think if any information comes out that makes him sympathetic, and I'm already seeing that he's done extensive reading on spine related back pain. So, like Tim had mentioned, that he had a back injury and potentially back surgery, but we're getting this additional information that implies that he might have been in severe pain. So that's something that's going to be sympathetic to the public or seen as sympathetic. If he has friends come out of the woodwork and say, "Oh, he was this really great guy," I think people will continue to romanticize him. But even better for these people is if nothing is said at all, because then they can project whatever they want onto this face, this handsome face. Whatever they're looking for, whatever they're searching for, they can just project that into that person and write their fan fiction. And I wish I was kidding, but people literally did write fan fiction about the Boston bombing um, perpetrators and post those online. So I'm sure if that hasn't happened already with this case, it will. But I think that's really what's behind all of this is projection. And there's also the tendency of wanting to save someone. So I think if he does what Joe Karzarnaev did and make minimal comments to the public, I think people will continue to project onto him.
What do you think about these details that suggest that he had a Robin Hood sort of psychic moment, or like was trying to project something? I mean, if you were a defense attorney, you'd already be lining up that. Well, I probably can't win on the evidence, but I might be able to win on jury nullification. You know, that like who's going to convict him, right? I mean, he might be guilty, but we've known instances in the past. And the one that gets me, and you know the case better than I do, but the marked bullets, which is so Robin Hood, which is so, you know, some character who attacks the rich and is sending them, literally sending a message. Used to be attached to a flaming arrow a couple hundred years ago, now is part of a bullet. I mean, there's a little history there. I'm sure if anybody wants to do a little YouTube or a Google search, you can see that even today, in some of the wars being fought today, whether in the Middle East or Ukraine, people write messages on artillery shells and rockets, you know, saying, you know, hello, my friend, you know, happy birthday, and things like that in whatever language. So that's an old thing. Probably some caveman somewhere wrote on a spear, you know, good luck, Gork. You're getting this spear, you know, for your neighbor. Do you think that all of this, and we're going to go through some of the others, was intentional on his part to create the mystique about himself?
I can't imagine that wasn't a part of it. He had to have known with the way that he did it that this was going to become a huge international sensation. I mean, why wouldn't he go to the victim's hometown out in, I believe it was Minnesota, and do it? Instead, he chose to do it in the middle of New York. He writes on the shell casings. He leaves behind monopoly money. He does a lot of things that it's like I said, it's a guaranteed media tornado or whatever you want to call it. But that's really what it feels like, such a frenzy that you can't escape this story. So I think that he did want to be noted. I think that could be part of what his motivation was here, was that he wanted that recognition and he wanted to be viewed as a hero. And so far he has been successful. I can imagine he is loving the things that have been said about him and the way that his victim has been antagonized.
Yeah, I put a quote in the chat. And again, I'm going back to this amazing analysis done, I guess, 60 years ago by Barbara Tuchman about that period of anarchist assassinations. And they assassinated the Empress of Austria and presidents of countries. And it was just bombs were thrown. And after one particular incident, there was a French artist named Teilhard, and he said, "What does it matter what the victims suffer if the geste est beau, if beau geste, if the deed is beautiful?" And there was just a romance of the deed. And you use the word fan fiction, and it's I mean, again, somebody's going to write a great book on him, or probably several, and somebody's going to do a TV movie. It's almost like if everything is true that we're hearing, he wrote his own fan fiction, then he played himself in it.
I love the way you just put that. You're right. I think he did write this whole thing out himself. This was very calculated, very intentional, and at risk of sounding like one of his admirers, very thoughtful each step of the way. I think that's something else that his fans have noticed is he's very thoughtful. And you had mentioned before thinking about what his defense attorney might do or say if this is something that ends up going to trial. And I think it'll be hard to argue that he didn't do this based on the fact that he has the ID, he has this manifesto, the face matches. I think there's probably going to end up being DNA and fingerprint matches and all of that as well. But I think when it's established that yes, they did do this, physically did this, then it's okay, well, are they criminally responsible? And could they say that he was insane and had the idea that if he killed this man that he would fix the problems in the healthcare industry? I suppose, but the level of calculation and just how he has been so in this day and age, like so one step ahead of law enforcement, I think it's going to be hard to argue that he wasn't competent.
Yeah, I want to talk too, and I think you're about half my age, so you can speak. You can be the voice of youth in this on this show, and this certainly this episode. Uh, we have a situation now. I think anybody who has any rationality is extremely worried about this rising generation. Of course, he was a young man in his 20s. He is a young man in his 20s. And we're worried, are you going to be able to own a home? The 20 somethings, are they going to be able to own a car? Is the American dream, which has been available to several generations, at least since World War II, will it be there for this coming generation? We have so many threats from just economic stagnation, but also the AI replacing people and robotics and so on. And a lot of parents, grandparents, a lot of 20 somethings are very worried about the future. And we have a sense of powerlessness about it. Like, how do we change the future? Well, I mean, in Syria, an army, talk about violence, solves something. I guess, an army changed the direction of the country. We don't have rebel armies in the West. We don't have militias rising up in rebellion and taking over cities, but we do have the individual deed. And I wonder whether he is a generational symbol. I mean, I really am actually concerned that this might be a trend, because if somebody likes something, they might imitate it, right? Although, again, he did so many things right. I'm not sure the average person could follow in those footsteps, including just knowing where somebody was going to be at a certain time and having the right weapon or something. But what do you think about the generational part about this? I mean, I'm guessing that the social media part is skewing pretty younger in who's making these comments who are positive.
I would 1000% agree with that. I think that Gen X and boomers weren't going to have that attitude, the almost like flippant, unserious attitude about this whole thing. I think it's definitely a generational difference to even make light about something like this. And I do think that there is a distinct possibility that this could inspire a movement, sort of like the Columbine effect. I think people commit atrocities and then they end up getting rewarded for it. Like this guy is, it's not over with his being a sex symbol. I think it's only going to increase, especially if he maintains that intrigue, if there's someone else to blame, if he has elements to his character that are considered sympathetic. This isn't going to end. So because those were the elements with the Columbine effect where an atrocity is committed, the public has sympathy, the public blames somebody else, the public considers, not all of the public, but I think there definitely were some adolescent girls that romanticized Eric and Dylan. I think it's a perfect recipe for someone else wanting that kind of glory.
Yeah, let's talk about that too, and I'd love to hear your opinion as a psychology expert as well. Is that I guess because I'm a media person, I always link it to media properties or movies and books. But a couple of months ago, I rewatched Paul Schrader's great movie Mishima: A Life in Four Acts, and this was about the famous Japanese novelist and poet and playwright Yukio Mishima, who very publicly tried to incite a military coup in Japan in the 1960s. And then when he failed, he committed public suicide. And he wrote a lot of about suicide. And he wrote about how, it was an act of beauty within the traditional Japanese sense. And of course, suicide is viewed very differently in different cultures. In ancient Rome, if you're going to be a general defeated in the battle, the honorable thing was to commit suicide. And Japan, until very recently, they had a culture where like business executives would commit suicide to atone for something terrible that their company did. So suicide is not always viewed necessarily negatively. Giving up one's life, of course, we praise it when someone gives up one's life to like to rescue a drowning child, or a soldier in battle gets a medal, for jumping on a grenade to save the fellow troops there. Do you think that he will become some sort of generational symbol then of somebody who sort of struck back at the giant corporal world that we live in, where everything we do, our food, our air travel, everything is controlled by these giant corporations, and we're powerless? And he did something. And again, I'm not approving of it, but I'm just saying in the romantic fanfic that he wrote, which apparently tens of millions of people like. Uh, how do you see the psychology of that for the individual and for the society?
I guess I'll form an opinion on it when we really see how this unfolds. I think if he does end up being this generational symbol of fighting the man and of anarchy, I think it's a reflection of the dissatisfaction and the pain that a generation feels. The fact that someone like that would be hailed a hero, someone who did something so unthinkable, the worst possible crime, so uncivilized, and not even really achieving anything besides maybe some copycats. I don't know how he really could be considered a hero except for the fact that he stood up for something, but the way that he stood up for something was so vile. But I think there are plenty of angry people out there that the fact that he did something alone would be something that earned him like folklore hero status. I don't know if you're familiar with Colton Harris Moore at all. This was up in the Pacific Northwest, but he was called the Barefoot Bandit. He would steal from residences, and he was a fugitive on the run as like a teenager from law enforcement for a long period of time. He even stole an airplane successfully, and people were rooting for him, cheering him on, like hoping that he got away. And I think it's a reflection of a dissatisfaction with like the man, so to speak. So when you see someone who has completely rebelled against society and they've done it successfully and they do it in kind of a badass way, I think it can invoke this symbol status. This teenager, he inspired this local t-shirt designer or fashion designer. He printed t-shirts with this guy's face on it, and it said "Mama tried," and it like sold out super quick. And so it's like that's icon status right there. The fact that your face on a t-shirt sells out. I think it could happen.
Yeah, I actually this reminds me of another question about to what extent, now that we live in this era of instant fame and instant saturation on social media, how long something lasts. And we I haven't visited the Gabby Petito Reddit in a long time, and that case had its moment. I don't think it's being talked about anymore, but there are some cases, and Tim and Lance did a very triple series there of interviews with a gentleman who'd written a book about the John Benet Ramsey case. One of those cases that just never goes away. There's always something coming up there. Do you think this one is going to have legs, as they say in Hollywood?
Like you said before, I feel like a Lifetime movie is on deck here. It has all of the elements for an amazing thriller. And it's true. I think this is going to be a legendary case. There's just so many layers to it, and it invokes a lot of complicated feelings that, like like you pointed out, they're rooted in, I think, generational hostility and dissatisfaction with the inaccessibility of the American dream. That's like a huge part of American culture, is that promise. And I think more and more we're seeing just like pure, not just disappointment, but anger and rage against this system, this machine that gave us this false promise.
Yeah, that love-hate relationship with the super powerful and the super wealthy, I guess it's probably been around ever since there were palaces and there were peasants. Um, I am interested. Let's talk about another TV show, Succession, which I watched, and I was appalled by every single character in that show was awful. They were just awful, awful people who treated everybody around them who wasn't of the billionaire class like non-player characters in some video game. But if you go on social media for Succession, you see Team Shiv and Team this. I mean, there was this obsession with Generation Z with these characters who, the main group there were sort of millennial Generation Z billionaires kids who I thought had no intelligence, no talent, no ability whatsoever. They just were super wealthy. But all of these people, from younger people, fell in love with them and like wanted to emulate them. And then on the other hand, when somebody kills a member of them, then they become a hero too. There's sort of a dichotomy there. I mean, human beings are able to resolve cognitive dissonance all the time, but is it? I mean, do we hate the super powerful and the super wealthy, and then we also love them? We both can exist at the same time, right?
I guess we can exist at the same time. It's just a matter of, can we be friends? Probably not. And at what point do those hostilities boil over? And I think the wage gap and the amount of disproportionate power that the super rich have over the rest of us, I think it's just incredibly disheartening. And I wonder too if the frustrations felt by this individual, Luigi Mangione, I wonder if he maybe was also disillusioned by the election results. That was something that popped in my brain. Like, it's too early to know who he supported and what, but I do feel like the people that were disappointed in Trump winning, especially the younger people, there's the concern that, Trump is super wealthy and he's appointing all of these super wealthy billionaires to be in charge of all these different committees. And I think people almost feel like it's being like rubbed in our face a little bit that all of the power is staying with these super rich people and the rest of us could be screwed. This is just the perspective of a certain school of thought in the younger generation.
Yeah, Trump won the young male vote though, so he actually resoundingly won. I'm interested in that, but I think going back to something you said earlier about somebody being a sort of floating signifier where we can project what we want on them. I think if you want to make him into, I mean, we live in a society where Trump, you could say part of his attraction as a candidate was that he said, I'm sticking it to the fat cats and the power elite. I mean, that was part of his campaign. And some of the self-analysis in the Democratic Party is saying, like, how did we become the party of the elite? Because there was a national perception of that. So I think if you look online about this guy, you're seeing that folded in. I guess this is another phenomenon, is that everything gets folded into politics. Like, it's not possible to have a crime or an assassination where people don't push it into a political category supporting. I mean, nobody has a thought like, gosh, this makes me rethink my politics. Now everybody says, aha, this proves I've been right all along with my politics. So this has already been politicized without any evidence that it's actually yet. I mean, it could be. And if this was a movie, this guy would get up in the courtroom and make a speech, right, about I did this for the people suffering from insurance companies. But we don't actually know yet whether there's politics in it, but we'd like there to be, I guess.
It would certainly thicken the plot. But yeah, it's just a potential theory, because I know that depending on whoever people wanted to win, like that election really did invoke really strong reactions in people before and after the winner was announced. But I know that the Liberal Party's more for universal healthcare, public healthcare than Republicans typically are, and so that's kind of why I went there, thinking that maybe he has a more leftist agenda if he has grievances with the healthcare system as it is right now. But again, you're right. I am politicizing it when we really have no evidence to even theorize it at this point. I mean, he did it for a reason. He was driven to kill someone that, by all accounts, was a complete stranger. He There's signs of there being a motivation of wanting to stick it to the man, but it's interesting to see, or it will be interesting to see how far it ultimately goes.
Yeah, I think we've gone an hour now, and we probably need to wrap up. But there's one last question I wanted to ask you, as somebody who has probably looked at several hundred murder cases. Something that interested me on a technical level is that, as I understand it, and of course we don't know anything for sure yet, right? But as I understand it, as he was shooting, is this correct? His gun jammed, and then he cleared it, and then kept shooting.
Yes.
which which my friends here in Texas who are gun people say was a pro move. And so I just find that very interesting that the narrative of he's just a guy and the narrative of like this is a black ops, special operator, $5 million hit. I guess the latter has been ruled out, but still he pulled off some things which maybe he played that video game Hitman, which I'm sure I know you're a champion in, right, Chloe?
Oh,
But
for sure. Yeah.
but who knows where he learned to do that, because that's pretty amazing to pull that off in the heat of like conducting an assassination.
In broad daylight in public, the media described it as uh he barely hesitated when he hit the side of his gun to clear that jam. So I think as we learn more information about Luigi, if he is their guy, I think it won't be surprising if we find that he might have a history of having firearms, an interest in guns, an interest in going to shooting ranges or hunting. It would certainly fit that almost what seemed to be like an instinctual reaction to clear the gun quickly and proceed with the goal.
Yeah, and staying calm. I'm thinking James Franco for the movie.
He kind of does look like, I mean, he's too old, actually. We need someone
Okay,
younger.
you'll have to cast it.
Yeah, someone from Euphoria, maybe. I don't know their names.
Okay, so is it Sydney Sweeney would be his girlfriend who finds out about it, and or she's the McDonald's employee.
She's
There you go.
she's one of the McDonald's employees.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe he's played by like Jacob Elordi, or it's got to be someone like super handsome that's able to play
Yeah, I don't know
someone
who that
that's
is, so I'll take your word for it that that's a somebody to play the role.
someone knows. Someone knows
Yeah,
who
but
it
anyway,
is.
just an amazing case, and I guess we'll find out some more in the week to come.
Oh, yeah, I don't think this story is going anywhere. I think it's going to continue to just develop, and we're going to learn more about the suspect. And I know, like you put it, he's currently a man of intrigue, and I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. We're so grateful for everyone who has come to listen and to the people who are listening to this live recording now. This was Torn from the Headlines. I'm Chloe Canter.
Thank you. I'm David Perlmutter, and we will see you next time in the world of mayhem, missing, and the murder.
All right. So I just